Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here with a new Cinema 4D and After Effects tutorial about how to create this infinitely looping 3D logo from Cinema 4D and put it all together in After Effects and do some other little tricks along the way. So what we have here is this 3D logo from Cinema 4D of the Wu-Tang Clan logo rotating, and in addition to that, some After Effects 2D layers for this lower third. And nothing too crazy from an animation perspective for both, but why this technique is useful is because we're using some time remapping and expressions on the 3D layer to create the looping. So what we're doing is only having to render out these 45 frames from Cinema 4D, and the rest is taken care of through this time remap and expressions, and it will save a lot of render time and allow it to infinitely loop without having to re-render it. And because we're using Cineware and After Effects, it's all being sent over from Cinema 4D live. So if we made any changes over here, we could send them right back over and not have to re-render everything. So here's what we have going on in Cinema 4D. We'll start here. We have just this little logo rotating in 3D that I drew in Illustrator. And if I jump over to Illustrator, here's my logo that I drew out from memory. And this could be any logo. The idea is the technique, but for the sake of being thorough, I'll just make a new file in Illustrator and redraw this out from scratch. So I'll grab my pen tool, or press P, and I'll just draw, click and draw, then click and hold to draw this curve. Click on the anchor point to stop the Bezier curve from happening. Click and hold, draw another one. Click to get rid of the Bezier. And just basically repeat this process until I got a decent enough looking logo from the top of my head of trying to redraw this out. So here's the other side of the W. Click there. Here'll be the bottom of the W. And this could be Batman logo, could be Wu-Tang Clan, could be sports logo. Doesn't really matter, but I just thought this would be a fun one to use and integrate into 3D. So again, just click and hold. And then for this last point, I'll click on the end point and zoom out so I can see the whole thing. Then click and hold, and that's going to be my left side, and that's it. And you could do this in Cinema 4D with the drawing tools, but I have a lot more control in Illustrator, and I just prefer this method. I'll just save this file, save, and as always, important to remember to save it. So I'll just save it as W2, and save it as an Illustrator 8, and that's what we can get in Cinema 4D. So that's it for my logo, and again, this could be any logo. I'm going to go into Cinema 4D, and here's my file that we had set up. So just real quickly, what's going on here is we got the logo extruded. There's a couple lights and have it looking interesting enough so it can be getting some reflections. And I got on ambient occlusion. And I have a camera just to be able to set up the point that I would want this lower third. And I'll just start making this instead of talking about what it is. So I'll just do a new file, and we'll make this from scratch. So in Cinema 4D, the first thing I'm going to do is go to render settings and output and make this 1280 by 720 because I know that that's what I'm working with in After Effects. And I'll add ambient occlusion later, and we'll come back to that. So to get started, I'm just going to go over here and go to File, Merge Objects, and I'm going to find that logo, click on that Illustrator file. Connect splines is fine because it's only one, so it's not really going to matter. And if I press O to see where that is, it'll show me that. And I'm just going to start with zeroing out to get this in the center of my scene, just so I can work from the center. And of course, what I'm going to do to extrude this is just grab an extrude object from here with my tools and grab that. And up here, just make it a child of that extrude. And then we got our depth. So I'm going to grab the extrude now, make it a little more depth, say like 60. Now let's go a little further. That'll look good. Just big enough to where it looks like a big 3D logo, but not so much that it's going to be hard to rotate. So maybe 400. And because this is a small little logo in the lower third, I want some caps on it, and I want it to look a little more interesting. So I'm going to go to caps and go to fillet cap on both, and then I'm going to change it to engraved. So if I zoom in here, you can see that it's really cutting into that, and that'll help when it's really little. And to make it more interesting, I'm going to bring up the radius quite a bit, maybe 15 on both. And then I'm going to constrain it so it doesn't push it out and distort the logo. So that's looking good. This will work for what we need to do. Now I'm going to create just kind of a basic texture just to give, again, some interest. So I'm just going to double click down here and make one texture for this logo. And I'll make it that tan color that we saw and get a little reflection. So I'll turn on reflection and click this arrow to turn on Fresnel. So it's just the edges and kind of gradually gets more reflected by the edges, so it's realistic. And then for this one, I'm going to add a glow down here and maybe just 50, 50, and 400. Just so if I do a quick Command R, you can see that after I drag it onto it and actually texture this thing, it's going to show up with a full texture and then add a bit of a glow. And that looks a little more interesting. And we'll add some lights in a second to kind of really push this a little further. But that's good enough for a basic texture. Now to line this up where I want it to, rather than moving around, I'm actually just going to grab a camera up here and then use the camera just to kind of position this into the bottom of the screen. And I'll actually go to Filter, Grid, to turn off my grid since I don't really need that now. And just kind of position this in the bottom of the screen. So we're not going to animate the camera or anything, but this will be to just get it where we want it and get the perspective right. And that looks pretty good. So before we start animating it, if I do a quick Shift R, we can take a look at what we're seeing. And you can see that it's really bright head on, and that's not quite what we want. So let's actually just add some lights so when it's rotating, we can get a little glowing and get some actual light in there. So I'm just going to set up a couple lights. I'll set up one kind of close and one a little further away. I'll just make basic point lights. And you can see already that this is going to help make this more interesting. So I'll just drag that one over here and make that maybe a little on the orange yellow end of things and take the intensity down a bit. Let's see how that looks. That's helping. We're getting more gradation. And then I'm going to just duplicate that light by holding Command and pulling that up with the mouse. And I'm going to put this one kind of over here. And let's make that kind of like a bluish color so it has some more contrast. And we'll put that back up to 100. Let's see how that looks. Maybe a little close. We could pull that back. And we can always tweak the lights a little further later once we're doing the animation. That's kind of the point, is that it'll be all integrated. And we could just tweak, make little settings, kind of turn things up and down and get it at least close enough to where we want it. Now, a big thing that's going to help, like I said, is going to render settings and turning on ambient occlusion, because when we have that and we have these little engraved parts, that's going to make a big difference. We can see if we just move up and down, that really helps because it's chiseled in there to get that look that we want. So maybe that's a little too blue. I'll lighten that up a little. And good enough. I'll stop messing with the lights and we'll get onto the other stuff. So I'll save this file real quick so I don't lose it. Just say this as looping logo 2. And that's cool. So now let's do the rotation. And like I said, it's in After Effects, just using expressions with one exact rotation. And then from here on out for the rest of this, it's just remapping that same expression. So we only have to do this once. And we're going to save all the frames and renders and only have 45 actual frames we have to worry about. And the rest is going to be time remap, which is why this is useful. So because I know I want this to only be 1.5 seconds and 90 frames of 3 seconds is a little long for one rotation. So down here, I'm just going to make this 45 and make this 45. So now my whole timeline and files that would save out is just 45 frames. Now I want this to just rotate exactly one time in this time. So what I'm going to do is grab that extrude and go to Object, Coordinates. And rather than making keyframes with these, I only want to change this one little area. So at 0, I'm going to Command click, and then I'm going to go ahead in time to the end of my timeline. And I'm going to go around one rotation, whichever way I want it. And we can see that we're having a bit of an issue, which is good because our center point isn't exactly where we want it. So what we can do is on our extrude, before we add that, click L to move that in the center. Or I like using this little window of axis center, which is under Mesh, Axis Center, Because when you put vector objects and extrudes, it doesn't always put it where you want it in exactly center. So what we can do with this little menu is click Include Children, Use All Objects, and Execute. and that's going to snap that axis point exactly to the center of the extrude and that. So then if I rotate it now, it's going to rotate from the center, not from the back, and that's good. So again, I'm just going to go to the end and do -360, and I could just type it in, but it's fine. And then command click. And one thing, and it's good to kind of do this iteratively, get the main points down, but no, you can tweak stuff later. Now I think this is a little too big, so I'm going to grab this extrude actually and just bring it down maybe like 200, maybe 250. So apologies if you thought that that was going to be the right amount, but it's always a process. And now if I play this, we're going to see that it's going to twirl around once. But we have a couple of issues. I don't actually want this easing that's being added by default. I want it to be looking like the speed is exactly the same. As you can see, it looks nice, but it's kind of swinging into it, and it looks like it's definitely stopping at the end. And this is because Cinema 4D adds that easing by default. If I click and highlight one of these frames, you can see that the interpolation is spline, and that's going to ease into it, which is usually what we want. But in this case, I don't want that. So I want to grab that one and change it to linear, and grab the first one and change it to linear as well. And then if I play from the beginning and click on the right little viewport, you can see that it's going to rotate exactly. But it still looks like there's one little hiccup, and that's because we're going from 0 to 360, so back to exactly 0 over 45 frames, but then it's restarting. So what we need to do is actually grab that last frame and go down 1 degree. So we'll do it -359, command click this, grab that to make sure it's linear again. And now if I go back to the beginning, and it's going to loop my timeline, and it's going to look like we're not getting any little pauses. So I'll play, and we got our looping logo. It's working perfectly, and rather than make this a really long animation, we'll let After Effects take care of the looping part. So I'm going to just, again, save this file, and now in After Effects, I'm going to go into Project, and this is where we were, so I'll just double-click to bring in that new one that I made, so looping logo 02. And using Creative Cloud, we can bring in Cinema 4D files, and then it'll see it as footage, so I can grab this and bring it to a new composition, and that's going to make a new composition. And then we have a composition with our Cinema 4D footage on the software renderer. So if I just press 0 and have it RAM preview this, you can see that it's going to render it out in the software mode, and it's going to be looping and bringing in our 3D scene. And there we have it, and it's going to loop and look like it's working right. But what we want to do is have this composition be much bigger and allow it to loop while other stuff is happening. So what I'm going to do is go to composition settings, and we'll just make this like 30 seconds long just to make a point of how long this thing could go. And now if I press minus and look out, if I press 0 again or just scrub through, we can see this is 45 frames, so it's a second and a half, and then it shuts off. So how we can take advantage of our Cinema 4D file being sent over live and some stuff we can do in After Effects is I'm going to add time remapping to this, so it will loop endlessly. So I'll right click, time, enable time remapping. And what that's going to do is make a keyframe for the beginning and end, and then I can drag this whole thing out. So we could time remap it to slow it down and speed it up. That's kind of the idea. However, what we can do when we have keyframes now is it's still going to just play and then stop. And it's just going to keep showing that last frame. But what we can do is add a little expression to have this loop. So I'm going to option click that stopwatch for time remap, and then type in loop, uppercase O-U-T, left parentheses, right parentheses, and click out or press enter on the number pad. And now it's going to loop these time remap keyframes. So if we scrub through, it's going to keep playing this infinitely and keep looping. So if I change this to my standard render, let's take a look at this. It's going to take a little bit of time to animate and play through this to get through 45 frames, and I'll just try and keep talking and have something to talk about so I'm not seeming like I'm cutting this out later and editing. But once it gets to that 45th frame, we're going to see it's just going to use that render information and then speed right along for the rest, because it doesn't have to re-render those frames from Cinema 4D behind the scenes. It's just pulling them from the same ones, and we're almost there. It's rendering, at 39 of 900, so we got 900 frames to render. But once it gets exactly here, watch what happens here. Now it's just going to cook right along, and it's only pulling that same information. So we only have to render that part once, and we get all the rest for free. Doing something like this and using what we can do in After Effects with time remapping is extremely useful, because then we're only rendering out 45 frames. We can use it for 900 frames. And to make this even more interesting, what I'm going to do is add a couple effects, and we'll have that little 2D layer for the type. So I'm just going to add a glow on top of all of this. And why this is useful is because it's already rendered out the Cinema 4D part. So if I put this at something like 90 and just add a bit more glow, that's looking interesting. Maybe a little more, a little less, and maybe we'll tweak the lighting back in Cinema 4D. Now, if I RAM preview this, it's already rendered the 3D part. All it's rendering is that glow. And that's actually looking pretty nice. It's helping. It looks a little green. And what's great about this is we could go back into Cinema 4D, but I could also just add color correction to this. So this came out a little too green. Maybe I'll just grab curves, and on the Cinema 4D layer, just pull back on my green a bit. And now I don't have to re-render all of that lights and stuff. Again, press 0, and it's all working live. Barely had to do anything. So this is extremely useful to be able to render the Cinema 4D frames out once, and then add compositing, do our expressions, and get the rest here, and then it's glowing right when it's at the front. And maybe even still a little too much green. Maybe I'm being completely ridiculous, but close enough. Good enough for me to get the point of the effect that I'm talking about, and you could always push the color correction more later. So to get those kind of basic shape layers behind it, pretty straightforward, but let's just do that anyway. Up here in my shapes, I'm going to grab my rounded rectangle, so just click and grab that. And I want to have, if we look at my final file, a shape with a gradient, and it's scaling out, and there's motion blur, and even through some expressions with that glow on it. So I'll go back in my new composition, and I'm going to, again, grab that shape layer, make sure that I don't have this selected because I don't want to make a mask, I want to make a shape. Then I'm going to click on the word fill, change this to gradient, and then I can double click my gradient and pull some colors from here. So this one's looking kind of green, but that's fine. We'll just go with it. And this will be the green version. And just get kind of a light and dark gradient color. And then I'm going to, from where I want that to animate out, so say it starts to animate when it's looking exactly at the camera, I'm going to just click and draw this shape. And it's not going to come out right first, but that's fine. We're going to change that stuff in a second. And what I want to do is grab that layer and press Y to get pan behind and move this anchor points. So if I hold command, it's going to snap to the edges. So I want to put it right here, because I actually want to grow this out by scaling it exactly from this point. And then to fix the colors and roundness of the edges, down here under Contents, Rectangle 1, I can go down into Rectangle Path 1 and change this roundness down, which is cool because then you can animate this. And if I click on Gradient 1, it's going to give me these little lines, and I can reposition that to be vertical like I want it. So I can do this with all the shape options without having to get too much into adding the effects for this. And I'm just going to put this below this, call it background 1. And what I want to do to have this scale out is, again, right about when it's here, I'm going to, rather than it moving, grab scale, unlock constrained proportions, so that I can just have it scale out on X. And so I'm going to make a keyframe for scale, and then I'll just move that one ahead, say 15 frames, and then go back to where it was completely on its side. So shoots out right here, make a new keyframe, and then I'll just type in 0 for X. And what I can do now if I play is it's going to animate out and look really boring. So what I'm going to want to do is grab this last one, right-click, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease In. Grab the first one, right-click, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And then I can grab both of them, grab my Graph Editor tool, make sure that it's on Edit Speed Graph, and now I can push those curves a little further. So this will give us some nice easing on that, but I want to go even further and have it kind of really snap out of there. So I'm going to grab the right one, pull it to the left, grab the first one, pull it to the right, and turn that off. And then since this is animating quickly, I'm going to turn on motion blur for this layer, and the whole scene. So now if I play this, shoots out when it comes around, cool, that's working. Maybe a little too green, which again is fine, we can always change. And the theme of this one is, I guess I made this version too green, but whatever, we're doing it live. So back to a little bit of tan. And now what I can do to make this a little more interesting is I'm gonna grab this glow from my Cinema 4D file. So I grab that and copy that effect and then paste it onto the background. So I get that same glow, but I want it to kind of wiggle on glow threshold. So I'm gonna add another expression to handle that. I'm gonna option click glow threshold and type wiggle. So we'll wiggle that value, left parentheses, I'll type 1 for once a second, comma, 10, so 10 units, right parentheses, enter on the number pad. And now if I play this, the logo's glowing, the background's kind of glowing a little, it's all kind of animating, and we don't have that many keyframes, and we're using all of our looping stuff. So the last thing I'll do for this is just add text, and this will be basic, but it's good to kind of complete the project. So I'll just grab text, and I'll grab Gotham Light over here, because I always use Gotham if you want motion graphics to look nice. So I'll just type the RZA or your favorite member of Wu-Tang Clan, or it could not be about Wu-Tang Clan, you could have an actual network, but this one is fun, as we might as well go along with it. So I'm just going to back this up to about there, and let's say this is just fading in and blurring in at about this point. So I'll just drag this in point, or I could do option left bracket to pull that start point here. I'm just going to press T for opacity, turn that on, go ahead 15 frames, so shift page down for 10, and then page down 5 for 5 more, make a keyframe, go back to that first one, holding shift and put that at 0, and then I'm just going to grab fast blur and spell that correctly because that's important if you want it to come up, and just drag that on, and we'll do something like 100, and then we'll turn on the blurriness, press U to show all keyframes, go ahead and pull it down to 0, and that's fine, that's coming in fine. We could just grab both of those and right click keyframe assistant, easy ease in, just to add a little bit of interest and smoothing it out a bit, even though it's just opacity and blur. And then if I press 0 to preview, it's going to quickly load all of that, and we got our fading in little type logo, and that's working nice. And like I said, the point of all of this is that it's rendering out this 3D portion, and it only has to render that once, and then if we add all of our effects and glows and blurs and all that, it doesn't have to render that 3D part again. So if I wanted to color correct all of this parts together, I could do layer new adjustment layer on top of everything and grab something like curves, and I can push this curves a bit further, and say I wanted to push the red a bit, and I'll try and fix this green part, or I'll just accept that this version came out a little green and it's fine, and just keep pushing that. And now if I press 0 again, you can see that live it renders all of this really quickly, and that took almost no time at all, like a second of render time to render out these full 30 frames. And if I'm playing this now, you can see that it's working and it's happening live, and it takes no time to render. And maybe I went a little far with that color correction, so I'll pull it back a bit. And again, just 0, and look at how quickly that renders, and live updating, rendering out this whole thing, and dropping the effects on top of the rendered 3D portion at 100% quality, so we're at full resolution, and it takes almost no time to update that and blend that together. That hardly takes any time. It's rendering that under the hood. We have this whole animation. Now, say that we do want to make a change to our Cinema 4D file. I'll go back over here. Maybe I'll finally try and fix these lights that I've been complaining about, which no one else is probably bothered by, and maybe I'll just make that not so blue. Let's make that like also tan, and maybe add a little bit more glow on the texture, because why not? Maybe 75 strength, and point being, I'm just going to make a bunch of changes to stuff, maybe slightly reposition it just to make a point. And I'll do a quick Shift R here, and it's looking a little better. Maybe I'll just make it more dramatic, so take down the second light and push it a little further out. And I think my glow is too bright, and that's what's kind of tripping me up. So Again, it doesn't matter what changes you're making, or you don't need to make any, but my point here was that if I save this, again, go back over After Effects, it's going to be instantly sent back over with all the effects added. So again, now if I press 0 to render this, and this is rendering 1280 by 720 at full resolution, so this probably isn't necessary for preview purposes, but I'm just trying to make a point of how quick this is and how great it is to add these expressions to quicken this along. As if quicken along is a phrase, once I get to 45 frames, it's going to shoot right along, and this is real life, real-time rendering 100% on the fly from Cinema 4D, and then look at that, only got to render it once, same point I made earlier, but now we made a change. We didn't have to re-render it separately from Cinema 4D and re-add stuff or do anything else. We got this whole thing happening, and we can edit it on the fly. And the big point of this one being to remember to use our time remap and adding that loop out expression, and then you can have this rotation once and do the rest in post and save yourself all the render time. So this could be a really useful technique. I was really excited to put this one together. Try it on your logos, try it on any logos, or try to recreate the Wu-Tang Clan logo, because why not? And thanks for watching. As always, be sure to follow on YouTube at vimeo.com/Sean Frangella for both sites, as well as ask questions, ask for feedback, and anything you want to request on Facebook.com/Vytale, Vytale. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you at the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.